Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, there's more on that toxic legal political pretzel that had Trump's ties with Russia. Over in Washington, President Trump has lashed out at reports that the special counsel investigating Russian influence in the US election is now looking into whether the president himself has obstructed justice. But our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris joins us now live from outside the FBI headquarters. So, Kylie, tell us about this latest extraordinary development.
Well, what it means, Matt, is that if the president sacked the man who used to be the boss here, James Comey, the former director of the FBI, to make, as he calls it, the Russia thing go away, it was a pretty serious miscalculation. There is now a whole new layer to this. Not only is the investigation still trying to work out whether there was any collusion between Team Trump and Moscow in the run-up to last year's presidential election, now it looks like it's also about whether or not the president has actively obstructed justice, whether he's gotten in the way of the Russia investigation. Now, as we understand it, the new direction was inspired by his sacking James Comey, who last month gave his version of what happened to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Here's a reminder of how that went.
Why do you believe you were fired?
I take the president at his word that I was fired because of the Russia investigation. Something about the way I was conducting it, the president felt created pressure on him that he wanted to relieve. I didn't know that at the time, but I've watched his interview, I've read the press accounts of his conversations, so I take him at his word there.
It's pretty blockbuster stuff. Now, after the president sacked James Comey, the Department of Justice appointed Bob Mueller, another former director of the FBI, as special counsel in charge of the investigation. So the leaks from official sources that we're hearing today point toward his wanting now to speak to all the other intelligence heads to try and work out whether the president has been putting pressure on them to pour cold water on the investigation.
So Trump isn't known to be a wallflower on this issue. What's his response to all this?
Well, a kind of typical Trumpian response, really. He's been on Twitter this morning talking about a witch hunt led by some very bad and conflicted people. He says they couldn't get him on collusion, so now they're going after him on obstruction. This morning he was reprising his role as CEO in a White House appearance to announce more apprenticeships, but really he seems to be more in favour of firing than hiring these days. Now, this is a crisis in large part of his own making. If he hadn't sacked James Comey, we just wouldn't be here. Now, as Alex mentioned, Vladimir Putin has been sarcastically offering Comey political asylum, clearly stirring the pot, but then so is this president himself, who now reportedly is considering whether he should fire Robert Mueller, an act that could only create more controversy, even as he tries to argue there is nothing to see here.
Kylie in Washington, thanks very much indeed.
In the US, Donald Trump has appeared to acknowledge publicly he is under investigation for sacking FBI Director James Comey, but he appeared to attack the Deputy Attorney General who ordered the probe. As rumours erupted in Washington over who he might sack next, the president flew out of town. He's been in Miami, watering down another Obama-era deal, the rapprochement between the US and Cuba, which effectively ended a 54-year break in diplomatic relations. Here's our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris.
I am canceling the last administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba.
After undoing his predecessor's policies on healthcare and climate change, the president turned his gaze to an old Cold War foe just 90 miles off the coast.
You exercised the right you have to vote. You went out and you voted. And here I am, like I promised.
The president is selling his revision of relations with Cuba as a promise made, promise kept, to the delight of the anti-Castro lobby who helped him win the crucial state of Florida. But in reality, this is about slowing rather than overturning the renewal of relations between Cuba and the US, celebrated with such fanfare by the then Secretary of State 2 years ago.
We are gathered here today because our leaders, President Obama and President Castro, made a courageous decision to stop being the prisoners of history.
There are some who wonder Now, who will save us from Castro?
President Trump's supporters aren't as ready to let history go, even as the Castro era slips away, Fidel dead, his brother stepping down. For Americans, it will again become more difficult to travel independently to Cuba, and firms will be prevented from doing business with Cuban companies controlled by the military.
Buses, rental cars, hotels, marinas. So they have an extensive reach throughout the economy, and if you're not allowed to do any business with military companies, essentially you can't do business in Cuba.
Last year, there was a 74% surge in American visitors to Cuba, creating new opportunities for local people to rent out rooms. But new restrictions on individual travel could undo that.
And there's a 30,000 room shortage in Havana compared to the demand for tourists in Havana, and the Cubans have opened up their homes and basically become entrepreneurs overnight.
But Republicans who oppose normalization insist the president's new approach is a more effective way to help Cubans.
A better deal for the Cuban people, which is who we're trying to help here, by empowering them and doing so in a way that does not empower their oppressors.
And we will never, ever be blind to it. We know what's going on, and we remember what happened.
Today, President Trump lambasted the Castro regime for its human rights abuses, which he says the Obama deal ignored. But in truth, human rights abuses in other places have failed to pique this president's interest. On his recent visit to Saudi Arabia, he said he didn't want to lecture anyone. And the US has put the UN on notice that it may withdraw from the body's Human Rights Commission. Proof again, if any were needed, there is no Trump doctrine, but foreign policy performed step by step.
Kylie Morris reporting there.
I've been getting away